we're standing right outside the ruins of Crockenrow Church. Right next to it, on the first grave on the right hand side of the entrance.
Yes.
The very first grave you come to is this grave here.
Yes, sure.
Right, which lots of people probably don't know about.
Yes.
But it's a dead interesting grave because if you see it here, the name, the family name is Dietrichson. Dietrichson. It must be a German name.
Yes, it sounds like
Fred
a German
C.
name.
Dietrichson. Right.
It'll just be like the royal family, you know, German.
German,
yes.
That's right. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce some of their names down here, but the interesting one here at the bottom is the grandson.
Yeah.
They're all interred herein.
Yes,
except
sure.
The grandson here, Fred C. Dietrichson, and it says, this is interesting, but Captain, 7th Sherwood Foresters, killed in action at Dublin, 26th of April, 1916, age 33.
Yes.
So he was I've looked into this guy.
Right.
He's not buried here, obviously. He's buried in a military cemetery in Dublin.
Right.
Because he was shot dead on the morning of the Easter Rising, and he had really bad luck because Fred Dietrichson was a barrister in Nottingham. And at the outbreak of the war, his wife and his wee family, she was originally from Dublin. She was from, what do you call it, an ascendancy family in Dublin, just outside Dublin.
Right, sure.
Just outside Dublin.
Right.
And the Zeppelins, the Great Zeppelin panic, they had this fear that the Germans were going to use these massive big airships, Zeppelins, and they were going to bomb English cities. So she and the family took off back to her family over in Dublin to escape from that threat. He was left in Nottingham, and he got a commission in the Sherwood Foresters, or the Robin Hoods as they called them affectionately. And in 1916, after training, they get word to get mobilised because they were moving out. They thought it was to the front, to France and the continent. They thought that's where they were heading for. And it was only after they'd embarked at Liverpool that they found out they weren't going to France at all. They were going to Dublin to help suppress the Irish rebellion taking place. That was that Easter weekend, 1916.
Right.
So he ended up, he and his men, who hadn't fired a shot in anger at all, ended up in Dublin. And the most ironic thing, they're all marching through, they disembark at Dublin docks. There's a gunboat in the River Liffey, and it's pounding the rebels with a big cannon thing, you know. And they disembark there, and they're marching regimental style through the streets of Dublin. And all the Dublin people are crowded round, watching them marching through the street. And out of the crowd came his wife and his kids.
Right, sure.
And they had a brief encounter. They had a brief reunion, right?
Right.
Freddie!
How did you know we were in Ireland?
We heard the regiment had landed, so we came down hoping to see you.
I'm glad you did. When this whole business is over, I'll spend some time with you and the children.
Do be careful, Freddie. I love you.
I love you too.
And then on they went, and they marched on, and they marched right round the corner into a bit of Dublin called Mount Bridge Street.
Yes.
And the rebels were waiting for them then, unfortunately for Fred, because he gets shot dead. Right. He literally walked round the corner into Mount Bridge Street and was shot dead.
I mean, we can see that he was quite a young man.
He was only 33.
At that time, only 33.
He was only 33, he was just young. There was, the Sherwood Foresters took a lot of casualties that day. There was an IRA unit hiding in a house at the corner in a really good position to take them on, and they killed a lot of them before eventually they were flushed out. So he was buried in a military grave in Dublin. You can get a picture of his grave actually online.
You've been there.
I'm just going to get to that.
Right.
But the rest of the men, all these men that were killed, and there was a lot of them were killed that day, they were just dumped in a mass grave in some cemetery in the city. You know, that was what happened to them. But
it was a shame, I suppose. Obviously, it's young men, they don't know what they're walking into, you know.
Young guys, no idea, never been involved in any kind of action or conflict at all.
Yes, sure.
And that's what happened to them, sadly.
Yes.
However, you know that as a result of that rebellion, that action in Dublin that day at the GPO, the standoff at the GPO and everything that happened then, the rebels eventually had to surrender to vastly superior forces. They were, the ringleaders were rounded up and they hanged them.
Yeah,
they hanged them
sure.
in Kilmainham
Yes,
jail.
of course, yes.
And that was when public opinion in Ireland swung.
Behind
the
them,
pendulum swung the
because
other
a lot
way.
of them
and
were so young. What was it, Kevin Barry and all that? I
there
think he
were-
was 17,
there
wasn't
was,
he?
There was James Connolly, who was from Edinburgh originally. He had to prop him up in a chair because he'd been shot in the foot. He couldn't stand up, so they tied him to a chair in the stonemason's yard to execute him. But they shot them all, and that was when it was that kind of savagery from that revenge by the British that turned the tide of Irish opinion against them and more for the rebels, and they became martyrs and heroes, for the proclamation of the
Yeah,
Republic.
sure. But it's
you know,
amazing to think this is this. Do you think he was born here? Was
No.
he from here?
I don't know.
Yes.
That's his grandparents.
Yeah,
and
this is his
parents
grandparents and his parents.
are all buried here.
Buried
at
here, and of
Cochrane.
course
I'd love to know
there's
how-
a memorial to him here as
So
well.
he's mentioned in the headstone. So they're actually buried here. He's actually interred in Dublin. The thing was, at 2016, the centenary of the rebellion, or the scrap as they euphemistically call it in Dublin, the
All right.
scrap.
Okay.
Me and my friend Neil went over to Dublin to kind of join in the celebrations, the memorial of it, and it was Dublin. It was just packed with Americans and folk from all over
Actually,
the world.
because my relatives are Irish, and
Yeah.
my uncle and so on, cousins, they were at that celebration.
Yeah, it was.
Or
it was
whatever memorial.
It was just such an historical thing. Do you see what I did there? An historical.
Oh, all right, okay,
Dramatic
yeah.
license.
Yeah.
Anyway, I went over to Dublin for the centenary, and I went to a place called Arbour Hill, which is right next to the Guinness Brewery at St James's Gate. It's a cemetery where all those that signed the proclamation were killed and buried. They're all buried in lime. They were buried in quicklime there, but their graves have all been, lovingly restored. And next door is the National Museum of Ireland, and of course they had a big exhibition on, entirely concentrating on the Easter Rebellion. So I went round the exhibition, and they had at various points they would, for example, they would focus on a volunteer, a rebel, and they would pick out one guy from them, and they would do his whole background thing, and then they'd move on to something else. And when it came to the soldier, it was Fred Blinken Dietrichson.
Really?
It was a man himself.
Is that right?
It was
And
Freddie.
at that time, did you know about this grave here?
I did, yeah.
Yes, you
I knew
did.
about it. I
Yeah.
knew about it. But isn't that incredible that
You
go all the way to Dublin for the 100th anniversary thing, and at the big official national exhibition, it's this guy who's buried out here at his family are buried here at Crockenraw. That's the guy that's the featured British soldier in the whole exhibition. But the whole thing, really, the Easter Rising was really the birth of the Irish Republic. It was absolutely. But at
Yeah.
the same time, a lot of people were killed, and
Yeah.
the whole thing was just lousy.
Right.
Absolutely.
But it's a brilliant story, that.
Jake
Absolutely a brilliant
Dietrichson, there he is.
story.
There's
Yeah.
the boy himself, buried in Dublin, shot dead by the rebels in Dublin City at the Easter Rising in 1916. This is his family gravestone. It gets a mention here in Crockenraw Cemetery. And it is a beaut.
I knew my grandmother very well. She never talked about anything that happened in 1916. The subject was never mentioned. Well, you don't think about the human side. It's not talked about. It's not sort of the way history is taught, is it? That there's sufferers on both sides, and people who are absolutely nothing to do with the decisions or reasons for going to war are the ones who suffer.
There's nothing we can do for him. Nothing we can do.